Dr. Lee Jun-soo, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The terrorist attacks in the United States on September 11th posed a highly tense international situation and battered Asian stock market. On the next day, or September 12th, Japan's Nikkei 225 stock average sank below 10,000 to its lowest level in nearly 18 years. Dr. Lee, how is the sudden drop in the market affecting the already sluggish Japanese economy?
The terrorist attacks on the United States claimed the lives of so many innocent people, caused substantial economic damage, and left a deep wound in the heart of all human beings. As you mentioned, the tragic events also shattered the confidence of investors, and stock prices fell all over the world. In Japan, Nikkei index plummeted below the psychologically important 10,000 yen mark, and in the United States, Dow Jones index fell below 9,000 mark. Unfortunately, the tragic incidents occurred when Japan is still in serious economic difficulties. The sharp fall in the Nikkei index, if continued for a long time, will weaken the capital base of already fragile banking system in Japan, and this will pose a serious challenge to the structural reform efforts of Japanese government. Economic recovery is likely to be delayed further. We are, however, not very pessimistic about the situation, as the central banks of all industrialized countries are determined to avoid worldwide recession. The coordinated interest rate cuts undertaken by the world's leading central banks in recent days were an excellent demonstration of solidarity among industrial countries. Looking further into the future, the impact on Japanese economy will depend very much on the nature of U.S. responses to the attack. If military actions were to be short, the worst effect on the economy would be short-lived. On the other hand, if military responses were to be drawn out, then the effects would be more long-lasting.
How are Japan's unstable economic conditions affecting the markets of the Asian countries that are closely connected to this country? Could you explain the present situation of their markets with some examples?
Well, Japan is a major trading partner, investor, and donor for developing Asia. On average, 11% of developing Asia's exports comes to Japan, while about 15% of Japanese foreign direct investment and about 60% of Japanese bilateral official development assistance go to Asian developing countries. Economic slowdown and financial difficulty in Japan will affect Asian economies through three channels, namely trade, investment, and official development assistance, or ODA. First, Asia's export to Japan will suffer. This will lower economic growth rates of developing Asia, which will in turn lower Asia's imports from Japan, creating a vicious circle of low trade and low growth in Japan and developing Asia. Second, investment from Japan may decline as Japanese investors will have less incentive to invest abroad given global uncertainties and domestic difficulties. Third, even before the terrorist attacks, Japan was thinking of cutting down the total amount of its ODA. The terrorist attacks are not likely to improve the situation. To offset these negative external impacts, Asian developing countries are undertaking various policy measures, including expansionary and fiscal and monetary policies, to boost their domestic demand.
As of September 12th, the Asian stock markets were suffering from hard blows due to the terrorist attacks from the previous day and the plunging stocks at the Tokyo Exchange. How will these factors affect the Asian markets in the near future, especially the markets of those countries and regions that are closely linked to the United States, such as Hong Kong and Taiwan? Please explain the expected influence with examples.
Asian developing countries have close trade relationship with the United States. For example, 22% of Chinese exports goes to the United States. This share is even higher in some other Asian countries, namely 30% for the Philippines, 25% for Taiwan, and 23% for Hong Kong, etc. The tragic events are likely to have a dampening impact on the confidence of consumers and businessmen in the United States. So Asia's exports to the United States will be adversely affected. If the United States economy fails to show an early recovery, and if oil prices rises sharply as a result of prolonged military actions in the Middle East, the impact on Asia could become quite serious. However, we believe that the economic slowdown in the United States will not develop into a prolonged recession, as industrialized countries are making concerted efforts to avert global recession. I would also like to add that Asian developing countries are not likely to fall into a financial crisis as they did in 1997 because their economic fundamentals are stronger now than 4 years ago.
In the wake of the terrorist attacks in the U.S., the production and distribution of goods and movements of people have halted to a certain extent, and this fact is hitting the world's economy. In Asia in particular, the influence is more serious in the field of high-tech industry than other fields. So, Dr. Lee, would you please tell us some examples of the hardest blow on the high-tech industries in various Asian countries?
Yes, Asian developing countries export substantial amount of high-tech products, mainly to the United States, but also to other regions of the world. Last year, electronics exports occupied 64% of total exports of Singapore. This ratio was 61% for the Philippines, 58% for Malaysia, and 46% for Taiwan. These exports have been the engine of their economic growth in recent years. However, as a result of the burst of information technology bubbles or IT bubbles, electronics exports of these countries fell sharply even before the tragic events occurred. The terrorist attacks on the United States aggravated the situation further. The immediate impact of the outrage was the disruption in the air cargo shipments, which delayed the exports of semiconductors and other high-tech products. Expected downsizing of airlines, entertainment, and other affected industries in the United States will also have negative impact on the demand for high-tech products from Asian countries. On the other hand, the demand for some high-tech products may increase as the United States begins to rehabilitate their telecommunication networks and computer systems, which was damaged during the attacks. And also, as the country increases the production of goods related to military operation and security improvements. However, it is not likely that such demand will be sufficient to offset the fall in demand for other high-tech products. The key to the recovery of Asian export is the strength of consumer and investor confidence in the United States. Will American consumers continue to buy new computers, digital cameras, and cellular phones despite the recent tragic incident? This is the question a lot of people have in their minds. We believe that the confidence will depend very much on the earliest and successful resolution of the crisis.
Some of the Asian countries have been unable to put their economies on the right track yet since the Asian monetary crisis of 1997 and the Asian economic crisis. There are no doubts about that last week's terrorist attacks in the United States have given extremely serious blows to many Asian countries, including Japan. In fact, these countries' economies are closely interrelated to the U.S. economy. So, in this age of globalization, what do these countries need to do to restore stability to their economies?
The Asian financial crisis was also a surprise to all of us. And some countries, such as Indonesia and Thailand, are still struggling to get over the crisis which engulfed them 4 years ago. In this globalized world, what happens in one country, whether it is good or bad, affects other countries. For example, sustainable economic expansion in the United States during the last 10 years helped Asian countries grow faster, but the slowdown in the U.S. economy is now adversely affecting Asian economies. This interdependence is inevitable in the era of globalization. The challenge for Asia is to maximize the benefits of globalization while minimizing its risks. To maximize the benefit of globalization, Asia should remain open. Protectionism is not the answer. Evidences supporting outward-oriented development strategies are overwhelming. To minimize the risks of globalization, efforts should be made at 3 levels: national, regional, and global levels. At national level, the countries should strengthen their macro and microeconomic fundamentals. Maintenance of sound macroeconomic management and good governance in the corporate, financial, and public sectors are essential. Countries with serious structural problems need to address them with a sense of urgency. At regional level, strengthening of the regional economic monitoring and regional financial arrangement seem necessary to preempt financial contagion among neighboring countries and to manage crisis more effectively. At global level, coordination of economic policies among the industrialized countries needs to be sustained to avert global recession. A good example is the recent interest rate cuts by the world's leading central banks. It is also essential to strengthen international financial architecture to prevent future financial crises and reduce vulnerability in the international financial market. Finally, to prevent future terrorist attacks, there is a need for international cooperation in tracking down the financial sources supporting terrorist activities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee.